up, everybody? This is your boy, Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Point. And ladies and gentlemen, we have ourselves a jam-packed show for you all, as despite not having any volleyball to recap, we have a lot to discuss in terms of the volleyball, such as NCAA women's volleyball schedules. We have 5, yes, count them, 5 schedule releases, 4 full schedule releases, and 1 non-conference schedule release. It's going to be a jam-packed, awesome time to break down those schedules. We also have some Volleyball Nations League to go over. The VNL. How did the U.S. fare? Were they efficient? Did they get some wins? Or did they kind of fall flat? Either way, we'll be breaking down some U.S. women's volleyball action. We also have an AVP event this week, as we have Muskegon Open. That's going to be going on Saturday and Sunday up in nice and chilly Michigan. So hand me a volleyball, set up the net, because I'm about to serve you all some volleyball action here on Set Point. This is Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. And welcome all to another edition of Set Point. Hope you all are having a great Monday evening. I know I am. I also need to make note of something in addition to my intro and all my other things that I am discussing today. I have a little announcement at the end of the show, but it's not a bad announcement. Don't worry, it's not bad news. Let's all not hit the panic button. It's good news. So without any further delay, let's get on into that volleyball goodness. But first and foremost, we have a word from our sponsor. iSports Radio is proud to call the Southern California Warriors semi-pro football team the official sponsor of iSports Radio. The world of semi-pro sports is unlike any other sports organization. Players pay to play in hopes of so many different outcomes, whether it's playing to get film to try to stay in shape, to try out for professional teams, or big-time colleges. But no matter what, all semi-pro players have one thing in common, and that's playing for the love of the game. The SoCal Warriors have been on a quest to earn titles and give players second chances since 2017. Whether you're in Southern California or anywhere in the world, give semi-pro sports a chance if you love your sport. You may get the second chance you've been waiting for as an athlete. You can follow them on Twitter at SoCal Warriors, on Instagram at SouthernCalifornia_Warriors, and on Facebook by typing in the word IE, then sports, then radio. And then IE Sports Radio is available on social media, on Twitter, and on Instagram at IE Sports Radio, and on Facebook by typing in the word IE, then sports, then radio. And also, Southern California Warriors Semi-Pro Football Team is available on Facebook by typing in the word Southern California and then Warriors. Back to IE Sports Radio, they also have a website, www.iesportsradio.com, where you can go there and you see a Patreon link, which starts out at $5 a month. This will give you a shout out from all 31 of our shows, and higher tiers will include IE Sports Radio merchandise, access to IESRU, the podcasting university of IE Sports Radio, and even a chance to be featured on IE Sports Radio's flagship show, The Defining Moment with Larry B. Because for the past 8 years, IE Sports Radio has been bringing you amazing content ranging from interviewing legendary athletes, coaches, and other authorized media personnel to dedicating themselves to all major sports cities around the country. All the while, we've been continuing to be by the fans and for the fans, and with your help, we're ready to take the next biggest step. Thank you, everyone, for all of your support and for continuing to make IE Sports Radio your direct feed for all of that sports. Big shout out to our Patreon supporters, Bay Area Raised Apparel, Marcus Lowstrait, Key to the Gate, and an anonymous supporter. Also, a big shout to IE Sports Radio's Fan of the Month, Justin Ekstrom. He is a Minnesota Vikings fan, hailing from Minnesota. His Twitter is @thesportscrib21. He is also a big-time supporter of 7th Street Pizza in Minnesota, and he's a good friend of Vince Wright, the sports governor, one of IE Sports Radio's, I want to say first hosts, but regardless, Vince Wright, big shout to him. He's doing big things. And we also want to give a shout to everyone for making IE Sports Radio's 8th year anniversary super duper special. Here's to many more to come, and once again, thank you all for your support. As we see the chat room going on, Mike says it's time for the best volleyball podcast on the internet, and he says don't retire. He's thinking that my announcement at the end of the show is me retiring. No, it's not me retiring. Don't worry. That's not going to be happening for a while, but I won't spoil what the announcement is, but without any further delay, let's get on into that volleyball goodness. Starting off with the NVA. So, there weren't any games last week. However, for those of you that were listening from last week's episode of Set Point, the Orange County Stunners and the Los Angeles Blaze were still going on, and unfortunately, I didn't get the end result, as I tweeted it out on Twitter. But the result was the Orange County Stunners defeating the LA Blaze in 4 sets. The Blaze took the third set, 25-19. They pretty much manhandled the Stunners in that third set. And it looked as if they had gotten the momentum. However, the Stunners are the reigning champions for a reason. And that reason being is that they were not going to take any guff from the Los Angeles Blaze, despite the Blaze being vastly improved. So currently, going over the NVA standings, let's start with the National Coastal Division. The New Jersey Freedom. The New Jersey Freedom is still all alone in first place with the best record in the NVA with a perfect 6-0 record, while the Orange County Stunners are 4-2. The Seattle Sasquatch, which earned their first win last week, is 1-5. Jumping over to the American Coastal Division, the Las Vegas Ramblers are still all alone in first place with 5-1. They're a very distant 5-1, while Southern Exposure is second in the division with a record of 2-4. Lastly, we have the Inland Empire Matadors chilling at 1-5 in the American Coastal Division, bringing up the rear. Then in the National Central Division, we have the Texas Tyrants in first place at 5-1, the Los Angeles Blaze in second place at 3-3, and the Chicago Untouchables bringing up the rear at 1-5. Lastly, we have the American Central Division with the Dallas Tornadoes and the Utah Stingers both tied for first place at 3-3, while the Colorado Kraken are bringing up the rear at 2-4. Once again, the Colorado Kraken had themselves a tough loss, losing to the Las Vegas Ramblers. They had the lead at 10-5, but unfortunately, the Ramblers, being the veteran, savvy team that they are, came back, outscored them 10-3, won the fifth set, 15-13 off of a service ace from Jordan Hoppe. So that's pretty much your NVA update. There is no NVA this week. However, next week there will be some NVA action, as I am very excited for it, but I'm not going to go in depth on what the matchups are. That's not going to be till next week, so unfortunately got to wait a week till I do a little preview. So that is that for the NVA and its event number 3. Now we can jump on over to the NCAA women's volleyball schedule releases. So we had 5 schedule releases. Yes, count it, 5 schedule releases, and boy howdy, they are something to not forget about. So let's start off with the schedule release that is a non-conference schedule release, as Purdue released their non-conference schedule last week, as they released it, as they will be kicking off the season on August 26th in Knoxville, Tennessee. They'll start off by facing Bowling Green, and then following that, they will have a double header on their hands, as they will be playing Loyola of Chicago, and then they will be closing out the Tennessee Classic by playing host Tennessee in the nightcap matchup. And that's going to be a great matchup. Purdue versus Tennessee. The battle of 2 NCAA tournament teams. One team went to the Elite 8. The other team made it to the round of 32. Tennessee does return a good chunk of its players, while Purdue lost a few of its players, but they always have a good recruiting class, and they have a bunch of good players to basically take over and take the reins and just run with it. As we say hello to Pierre Moss, he says, have a great show, Teran. Mike Pat says he's loving these names. He's loving those NVA names. And also, we need to get an NVA team in the DMV, aka the Delaware, Maryland, Virginia area. So please, DMV, please give the NVA a team so we can expand the NVA. So we need a DMV team from the NVA. I just wanted to throw that out there. Mike Pat also says it doesn't matter because FSU is winning it all. Florida State, that is. We'll see. I mean, when their schedule comes out, I will definitely inform you, and then I'll dedicate that to you. Going back to Purdue, next up they have the Reamer Club Extra Special in West Lafayette, Indiana, which is their neck of the woods, which is basically their kind of their tournament. So they have their first matchup on September 2nd in the Reamer Club Extra Special against Bradley, and then that's kind of the appetizer. The main course matchup of September 2nd is the matchup against Utah. That's going to be a very good matchup right there. Utah versus Purdue, Pac-12 versus Big Ten, Elite 8 versus Sweet 16. Oh, I'm sorry, round of 32. So it's another round of 32 team that Purdue will be facing, and I think it's going to be an exciting matchup. Utah always gives teams their best, regardless of who they have or who they graduated or who is in or out. And then Purdue closes out the Reamer Club Extra Special on September 3rd against University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Milwaukee's kind of that sneaky good team. I think it's still going to be a good matchup for Purdue. It should, somewhat test them, but it's not going to be as good as Utah. Jumping over to the Louisville Invitational, this one's going to be what truly tests Purdue, as Purdue hits the road to Louisville, Kentucky to take on host Louisville on September 9th. That one's going to be a fun matchup. Final Four team versus Elite 8 team. ACC team versus Big Ten team. That's going to be a barn burner. I know Louisville lost quite a bit to graduation, but they always have a good team year in, year out. I really think that this is going to be a great matchup right here between the Cardinals and the Boilermakers. And then Purdue closes out the Louisville Invitational on September 10th against Lipscomb or Xavier. I guess they haven't decided on who they're facing in that matchup, but either way, they will be playing one of those two teams. And then they close out non-conference play in the Stacey Clark Classic in West Lafayette, Indiana. So they start off the action against Northern Kentucky on September 15th. And then they close out the Stacey Clark Classic against an interstate rival, Ball State, on September 17th. Now, for everyone that doesn't know, Ball State did make the NCAA tournament. They won their first NCAA tournament game, knocking off Michigan in 5 sets in the first round. It was their first NCAA tournament win since, I want to say, 93. Either way, it was a long time coming for Ball State women's volleyball. So I really am going to like this Purdue versus Ball State matchup. Ball State just doesn't get the big of a rap that Purdue does just because Ball State isn't in a Power 5 conference. So I'm really going to enjoy the Ball State versus Purdue matchup. And that is that for the Purdue women's volleyball schedule. So jumping on over to the ACC, which is basically the neck of the woods of Mike Pat because he went to Florida State. So we'll start with Notre Dame. So Notre Dame released their schedule last week as well. They open up first I should make note that Notre Dame missed the NCAA tournament. I should also make note that I said Purdue made the Elite 8. And Notre Dame barely missed out on the NCAA tournament. And I want to say, even if they had a 500 record, they probably wouldn't have made the tournament. I mean, I'm not trying to diss them, and who knows, maybe that Louisville win could have gotten them in, but either way, Notre Dame didn't make the NCAA tournament. They had a rough start to their non-conference schedule, And overall, it was just a frustrating year for the Fighting Irish. In addition, they lost their head coach, and in addition as well, they lost quite a bit of players to the transfer portal. However, there is hope as Alana Rockwell is going to be their head coach, and she is going to bring a lot of wealth and knowledge when it comes to the volleyball scene. And I really think that she can provide a light for Notre Dame. Anyway, now we jump on over to the Notre Dame women's volleyball schedule. So they start off at home at Purcell Pavilion against Texas Tech. This is probably their Notre Dame tournament. I'm just going to probably call it that. They open up the season against Texas Tech. That's going to be a fun little matchup just because, well, Texas Tech made the NCAA tournament, and I really think that's going to test them early on. I have a good feeling that this Texas Tech team isn't going to be something they're going to take lightly, just because Texas Tech doesn't get the same spotlight as Baylor or Texas, but Tech does have a good reputation. They have a solid team, and that team they made it to the round of 32. I think it's great that Notre Dame is kicking off their season against an NCAA tournament team from last year. So there's that right there for Notre Dame. Then they follow that Texas Tech matchup on August 27th against Mississippi State, another NCAA tournament team, which I think is another great test. Mississippi State had a great season last year, only lost 2 matches overall. Well, 3 if you include the NCAA tournament match, which they lost to Hawaii in the first round. But Mississippi State should have an interesting team. That's going to be another test, not only for Mississippi State, but for Notre Dame as well. It'll prove if Notre Dame is for real, and vice versa for Mississippi State. And then Notre Dame closes out the Notre Dame tournament at home against Milwaukee, or University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee on August 28th. That should be a sneaky good matchup. I think Notre Dame should be able to handle them, but it's not set in stone. But I have a good feeling for them. Currently, their roster consists of Nancy Kane at setter, who's a senior, Hattie Monson, junior libero, Kiara Schmidt, senior libero, Lauren Tarnoff, junior middle blocker, Charity McDowell, junior middle blocker, Fiona Schrader, sophomore setter, and Paris Thompson, sophomore outside hitter. This is their current roster right now. They only have 7 players. They won't have 7 players come the season because they're going to have their recruits. They're probably going to have transfers officially sign in. So there's that right there. Then Notre Dame hits the road to beautiful Long Beach, California for the Long Beach State tournament, as September 2nd they will be taking on Boise State at 7 p.m. Now, I'm not certain if I'm going to be going to check out all the matches, but I will check out the next match that Notre Dame has. As for Boise State is such a sneaky good team. I think Boise State is underrated. Again, they don't get the same love that all the other West Coast teams do, just because, or Midwest teams that Boise State gets in terms of the love, as Boise State is not from a Power 5 conference. And Boise State, unfortunately, just kind of gets the shaft. And it doesn't really help that the Mountain West Conference only gets 1 automatic qualifier. Unless there's 2 really good teams. But that's besides the point. Notre Dame finishes up the Long Beach State tournament against host Long Beach State on September 3rd, which is a Saturday. I definitely will be going to that one, no doubt about it. I'm going to reserve my ticket, reserve my spot at the table, and then check out the matchup. So I'm excited to see what Notre Dame has to offer against Long Beach State. And this is kind of a little bit of a preview of Long Beach State, as Long Beach State playing Notre Dame is kind of an indicator that Long Beach State will want to schedule tough. I mean, they've scheduled somewhat tough. I mean, some of their non-conference schedule opponents haven't really been by choice. Sometimes they've been entered in a tournament, and then they've had to play this team, that team, and then really tough team, and then that other team. But I can already tell you that Long Beach State is going to schedule tough. But this isn't about Long Beach State. This is about Notre Dame. back to Notre Dame's schedule, they will be heading down to Norfolk, Virginia, as they will be taking on East Carolina on September 9th. And then that same day, they will be taking on Old Dominion that same day. And then following their trip to Norfolk, Virginia, they will be closing that out against Navy, which I imagine is the host school. And yes, it's actually Old Dominion's the host school. Old Dominion is the host school, as Old Dominion will be playing host to this tournament, and they'll be playing Notre Dame on September 9th. But Notre Dame plays Navy on September 10th. And then Notre Dame has 2 non-conference games as they play Central Michigan at Indianapolis. And then they also play Ohio on the 16th and the 17th. So it's kind of an interesting scenario that Notre Dame is playing in its home state, but they're not playing on their home court. So quite interesting right there. And then, ironically enough, Notre Dame kicks off the ACC play against Mike's favorite team, Florida State, in Tallahassee. That'll be on September 23rd. Notre Dame will stay in Florida to take on Miami on September 25th. Then Notre Dame heads on over to the ATL to take on Georgia Tech on September 30th. And then Notre Dame finally gets to have its first ACC home game against Clemson on October 2nd. And then on October 7th, Notre Dame hits the road to the Big Apple to take on Syracuse. And then they'll be staying up east on October 9th to take on Boston College. Then Notre Dame heads back home to take on Wake Forest on October 14th. And then we'll have Virginia Tech 2 days after. Then Notre Dame has to head up to the land of the Yinzers as they play Pitt on October 21st. And then they will also be playing Virginia on October 23rd. And then they'll stay on the road on October 26th to take on Louisville. Then, after their matchup against Louisville, Notre Dame returns home to host all 3 North Carolina schools. They host Duke on October 30th, then North Carolina on November 4th, and then North Carolina State on November 6th. Then Notre Dame will also be hosting Florida State on November 11th, Veterans Day. And then Notre Dame has 8 days off, but then their next matchup on November 19th will be against North Carolina State. And then Notre Dame will be hosting Louisville on November 23rd. And then closing out the season, Notre Dame heads up to Blacksburg to take on Virginia Tech to close out the season. So Notre Dame has a very tough schedule when it comes to their conference play. They get Louisville twice, which is a big oof. Fortunately for them, they do only get Pitt once, and they only get Georgia Tech once. But they get Florida State twice, which, Florida State's kind of that mid-tier team. They're going to be better than they were last year. Like, with all the players that they return, I think Florida State's going to be dangerous. So, overall, I think it's going to be an interesting schedule for Notre Dame. Remember, Notre Dame missed the playoffs last year because they had a sub-500 record. But that doesn't mean they will be better this year. I think they can definitely improve. My only thing is they have to, I repeat, have to win their non-conference games early on. Otherwise, they're going to be in the scenario where they're under 500 and they can't qualify for the NCAA tournament. So that is Notre Dame's schedule right there. Staying in the ACC, we have Pitt's women's volleyball schedule, which I kind of leaked when it came to Notre Dame's schedule. So Pitt opens up their season in College Station, Texas, as they, right off the bat, Pitt they play San Diego on August 26th. Now, that's going to be a very fun matchup. San Diego always has a great team. Well, not like great team, but a perennially strong team. They do have a lot of question marks they're going to have to answer with Katie Lukes having graduated, but they still have Grace Froling. However, Pitt does have a solid team of their own. It's not going to have Kayla Lund, obviously, and Lecator member Monet also graduated as well. But Pitt always has a perennially strong team. I think they're going to have an interesting start to the season. They also play another NCAA tournament team the following day as October 27th has Pitt playing Hawaii, which I think that's going to be a fun little matchup. I think it's going to be an underrated matchup for that matter, just because Hawaii is kind of getting their sea legs back. Obviously, them winning an NCAA tournament match really helped them get their sea legs back in terms of getting back to their dominance. But Hawaii was kind of that underrated non-Power 5 conference dynamo. And then COVID kind of happened, and then COVID has finally passed, and Hawaii is back, ready to tear up the volleyball world. And then Pitt closes out the College Station tournament as they play host to Texas A&M on Sunday, August 28th. Texas A&M is kind of underrated. They don't have the team that they had back in 2019, but that's a big understatement. I think that should be a fun little matchup. I think that could be sneaky good. So right off the bat, Pitt has 3 challenging opponents in its different way. Then Pitt hits the road to Provo, Utah to take on Cincinnati on Friday, September 2nd. And then in addition to that, they also play Utah State. And then Pitt will close out its road trip to Provo, Utah when they play at BYU on September 3rd. So that's going to be a rematch of not last year's Elite 8 match, because BYU lost in the Sweet 16. But BYU and Pitt played one other last year. Pitt did come out on top, which actually turned out to being BYU's only regular season loss. But for me, I think this is going to be a barn burner. Non-Power 5 conference team versus Power 5 conference team. I really think this is going to be a fun matchup between the Cougars and the Panthers. And it's going to be at BYU. So Pitt is going to have to be resourceful on the road. They're really going to have to step up. Courtney Vizzerio will have to step up, as well as the other players like Sabrina Starks and whatnot. So there's that. Then Pitt returns home to Fitzgerald Fieldhouse as Friday, September 9th, they host American, and they also host Bowling Green. And then Pitt closes out its Panther Challenge when they play Towson on September 10th. No offense, but that's not really the strongest of opponents. I'm not going to knock Pitt's schedule. Sometimes you have those are the only teams that they get available. It's not me knocking them. It's just that I would have liked to see them play someone else that's good, but I can't complain because their next little outing is going to be their next 2 matchups is basically the creme de la creme when it comes to their non-conference schedule. As Pitt plays on September 16th, which is a Friday, against Tennessee. Now that is going to be a very fun matchup. Last year, these 2 teams went 5 sets, so I imagine that the Lady Vols and the Panthers will be going maybe at least 4 sets, maybe 5. Tennessee returns a good chunk of their players, as well as Pitt. And then Pitt closes out its non-conference schedule against the Ohio State on Sunday, September 18th. I think it's going to be another fun matchup right there. Ohio State is slated to be really good this year. They're slated to be one of the teams that win the Big Ten, and they have a lot of good players returning. So I really think Ohio State is going to really test Pitt. So we'll see what happens in that matchup. Then Pitt opens up conference play at home against North Carolina. So Pitt's going to have quite a good homestand going on starting on September 9th. And it'll go through September 25th when Pitt also plays NC State. I'm not so sure about NC State. I think NC State Pitt can definitely handle. North Carolina could also be someone that North Carolina or Pitt handles. Well, North Carolina always has a solid team. I really think North Carolina is under the radar when it comes to the ACC. Not entirely sure, but we'll see how it goes. So Pitt, returning to its ACC schedule, they play Virginia in Charlottesville on September 28th, a Wednesday. And then on Friday, September 30th, Pitt plays at Duke. They should be able to handle those opponents well. And then Pitt takes a break from ACC conference play as they play at High Point on Sunday, October 2nd. And then Pitt returns to ACC play on October 7th against Clemson 2 days after, Pitt gets a big challenge, their first challenge of the ACC, as they hit the road to the ATL to play Georgia Tech on October 9th. Then Pitt returns home to Fitzgerald Fieldhouse to take on the Florida schools, Miami on October 14th, and then Florida State on October 16th. Pitt then hosts Notre Dame on October 21st, and then October 23rd, Pitt hosts Louisville, which that's going to be a barn burner. That could be for the ACC title early on, but it's not set in stone. And then Pitt's going to finally hit the road for a 4-game roadie as they hit the road to Wake Forest on October 28th. 2 days after, Pitt hits the road to Blacksburg, Virginia to take on Virginia Tech. November 4th, Pitt plays at Syracuse, which I know 2020 didn't really mean too much, especially since Pitt did win they placed second in the ACC, but I'm interested to see how Pitt does against Syracuse. And then Pitt closes out its road trip against Boston College on November 6th. Pitt returns home to take on Syracuse on November 11th. And then they have 2 tough games. The first one being November 18th at Louisville. And then November 23rd, Pitt plays Georgia Tech. So at least those games are spread out for Pitt. It's not going to be like one day and then rest, and then the next day they play that opponent. It just means that Pitt's going to have quite a bit of time to prepare for the next opponent. Especially that Louisville matchup where Pitt gets a week to prepare for Louisville, and they get to travel to Louisville, so that'll be quite something that's interesting. Pitt closes out the regular season at home against Boston College on November 26th, so that is Pitt's schedule right there. Overall, Pitt's schedule is kind of a roller coaster. They start off really good, and then it kind of slows down, and then it lightens up, and then it gets really intense when they play Ohio State and Tennessee, and then their ACC schedule is quite interesting as they play Louisville twice, they play Florida State once, they play Georgia Tech once, so actually they played Georgia Tech twice, but overall Pitt's schedule looks manageable. I think overall it's still early to tell. I really think Pitt has that potential to win the ACC. However, I just think that time will tell. It all depends on attrition, how a team performs and doesn't perform, and if a team is performing well or if they're underperforming. So we'll see what happens as, once again, Pitt plays Louisville and Georgia Tech twice. That's already tough as it is. And then Florida State should also be a challenge. North Carolina should be somewhat challenging. Miami should be challenging. So we'll see what happens with Pitt. So that is that for Pitt's schedule. Jumping on over to the West Coast Conference, we have BYU schedule. So I forgot to mention Pitt made the Final Four last year. They lost to Nebraska in the semifinals. Obviously, they graduated Kayla Lund, Lekator Member-Benet, and a few other seniors. But it does not mean that Pitt is going to be short of talent. They do have a lot of good players. Like I said, they have Courtney Vazario, who was a standout at Iowa. Iowa. And that now she is at Pitt, which I think is going to be quite a great addition for Pitt. It gives them that good pin hitter, especially on the right side. Especially that was kind of what they were lacking in before they had Lekator Member-Benet. So there's that. Now we jump on over to BYU. So BYU lost in the round of 16 in heartbreaking fashion to Purdue. For those of you that do remember, they were up 14-10 in set 5 against Purdue. They lost in the 5th set. I want to say it was 20-18. They had so many opportunities to close out the match. They had 5 match points. Unfortunately, BYU just could not get the job done. So right out the gate, BYU hosts Rider, interesting first choice, Rider of all teams, on August 26th in its BYU Invitational number 1. Later that day, they also play Duke. The Duke one should be an interesting matchup. Duke doesn't really have the best team, but you never know with these ACC teams. The real matchup for BYU will be August 27th when BYU plays Washington State. That should be a fun matchup just because Washington State has such an underrated team. They do not get the respect in the Pac-12 that they deserve. So I think BYU Washington State is going to be a good test right off the gate. And something that BYU fans have been clamoring about is they really want BYU to schedule tough. All I've been hearing is BYU doesn't schedule tough. We need a tougher schedule. We're not going to be ready for West Coast Conference play. We're not going to be ready for the NCAA tournament. Blah, 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 blah. I get it, BYU fans. BYU needs to schedule tough. Let's break down the schedule. But honestly, BYU should still be solid for this year. BYU has another invitational on September 1st when they host Utah State. And then on September 2nd, BYU hosts Cincinnati. And then for the cherry on top, as I just mentioned in the Pitt schedule, BYU will be hosting Pitt. Once again, it's going to be at BYU at the Smith Fieldhouse. I really think that Pitt's going to have to be on its toes against BYU, just because BYU always has a good crowd when it comes to their matchups. Jumping on over to the Georgia Tech Classic, BYU then heads down to Georgia Tech. They have themselves a very tough slate when it comes to these two matchups. So the Georgia Tech Classic has BYU playing host Georgia Tech on September 8th, which is a Thursday. Very good matchup right there. They'll be playing the Julia Bergman, who is just killing it. As we say hello to Davidson Crooks in the chat room, he says, what's good? Just breaking down some NCAA women's volleyball schedules. I already broke down the non-conference schedule for Purdue. I already broke down the schedules for Pitt and Notre Dame. Now I am at BYU. Back to BYU's women's volleyball schedule. BYU closes out the Georgia Tech Classic against Ohio State on September 9th. That matchup is really going to be good. So this is what I mean that BYU fans now can finally be shut up about how BYU is not scheduling tough. BYU is playing not one, but two teams that made the Sweet 16, two teams that made the NCAA tournament in general, and then that Georgia Tech team made the Elite Eight. So BYU is finally going to get a taste of what having a tough schedule looks like. Now, do I expect BYU to come out on top against both Ohio State and Georgia Tech? That still remains to be seen. It all depends just because, well, Ohio State has high expectations this year, and then Georgia Tech still has the wrecking ball that is Julia Bergman, as well as a few other talented players on their team. So I think BYU is going to have their work cut out for them. It's going to be their first road trip, because keep in mind their first two tournaments are basically at home. They're basically BYU Invitationals 1 and 2, which I don't think is ideal just because you don't want to be at home because then you get complacent, and then once you're on the road in a hostile environment such as O'Keefe Gymnasium, that's when you kind of get a little intimidated. And then Georgia Tech has its little rivalry matchup against Utah on September 15th. That the Holy War never disappoints. BYU Utah is never disappointing when it comes to women's volleyball. I know BYU kind of manhandled Utah last year, but I think it's going to be a really good matchup between the Utes and the Cougars. This is going to be played at Salt Lake City, Utah, at the University of Utah in the Huntsman Center. And then on Saturday, BYU closes out its non-conference schedule against Utah Valley. Kind of an interesting matchup right there just because BYU plays Utah Valley. Now, I'm not sure if Utah Valley needed a filler matchup or maybe BYU wanted to have another interstate rivalry, not just with Utah Valley and Utah, but with, or I'm sorry, not Utah Valley, Utah State. But it's kind of interesting that BYU has that matchup right there with Utah Valley. So they're playing all of the Utah schools. Utah State, Utah, and Utah Valley. Jumping on over to the West Coast Conference schedule, BYU hosts LMU in its West Coast Conference schedule on September 22nd. This is going to be a fun little matchup. LMU isn't really the worst team in the conference. They're kind of underrated. They have a fairly good team, Their only problem is they don't get over that hump, which I kind of think is a little nah, if you ask me. Like, LMU had himself a solid year last year. The only problem is they didn't have that big breakout win, which got him into the NCAA tournament. You also got to remember that the West Coast Conference is not a Power 5. And one more thing to remember is that BYU, I think following this year, not this year, but the following year, will be jumping on over and making the transition into the Big 12. So BYU can finally stop clamoring that it's not a part of a Power 5 school. So we'll see what happens when it comes to BYU in the Big 12. But right now, they're in the West Coast Conference. They play LMU in their season opener, or their West Coast Conference opener. Then on Saturday, September 24th, BYU hosts Pepperdine. I think it's going to be another interesting matchup. Pepperdine always has a good team. Now, I said the West Coast Conference isn't a Power 5, but it's probably one of the few conferences that does get multiple at-larges, as Pepperdine and San Diego both made the NCAA tournament last year, as well as BYU, the conference champion. And there is no conference tournament when it comes to the West Coast Conference. So there's that right there. September 29th, BYU hits the road to Portland, Oregon, or the Northwest Territory to take on Portland. And then on October 1st, BYU will remain in the Northwest Territory to take on Gonzaga. Following that, BYU heads back home to take on Santa Clara on October 6th. Then 2 days after, BYU hosts San Francisco. Then BYU heads down to California for a 3-game road trip in California. On October 13th, they play St. Mary's, and then on October 15th, they play Pacific, which is basically the Northern California West Coast trip. So they go to Moraga, then they go to Stockton. And then on October 21st, which is a Friday, so they'll have 6 days of rest or in preparation before they play their big rival, San Diego, at San Diego, which will be a barn burner. It's always a barn burner when it comes to San Diego versus BYU. Then on October 27th, BYU finally gets to return home for a 2-game homestand. First one against Gonzaga on October 27th. Then 2 days after, BYU hosts Portland. Then BYU hits the road back to Northern California to take on San Francisco on November 3rd. 2 days after, BYU hits the road to Santa Clara to take on the Broncos of Santa Clara. Then BYU heads back home to take on the other Northern California schools, Pacific on November 10th and St. Mary's on November 12th. Then BYU closes out, they have their last road trip against Pepperdine on November 17th and LMU on November 19th. And then, interestingly enough, BYU closes out the season against San Diego at home on November 22nd on a Tuesday, which most teams are closing out the season on a Saturday, which is the last day of the season. But for me, I kind of find it weird that BYU is closing out the season on a Tuesday. But I guess that's how the West Coast Conference works. Maybe in case teams have to go through COVID protocols, they'll have days to make up following that Tuesday where everyone ends the season. I hope COVID is no longer a thing, by the way. So that West Coast Conference, or that West Coast California trip, is very late in the season. Normally, BYU has its West Coast trip like midway through the season or to start off the West Coast Conference season. But this time, it's going to be at the end, as Pepperdine and LMU are slapped in the third and second to last games of the season. And then BYU has another interesting matchup against San Diego, which is always a barn burner. And depending on what happens with San Diego and BYU, that could be for the West Coast Conference Championship. But for BYU's sake, they better have locked up the West Coast Conference by the time that Southern California trip happens. So overall for BYU's schedule, I really think it's a tough schedule. I know they're going to mow down the West Coast Conference for the most part, but I really like their non-conference schedule. Their non-conference schedule consists of quite a good amount of teams. They face 1, 2, 3, for 5 teams that made the NCAA tournament, one of which made the Final Four, one of which made the Elite Eight, one of which made the Sweet 16, and then 2 of which made the round of 32. So they're not playing any easy peasies. They're playing teams that they want to be challenged against. So I'm really excited to see what BYU has to offer this season, just because, once again, everyone has been clamoring for them to schedule tough. Now, closing out the schedule releases for the women's volleyball side of things is Tennessee. So I already leaked some of Tennessee's schedule when it came to Purdue and Pitt. So just to recap or reiterate for Tennessee's schedule. So Tennessee opens up its season on October 26th against Loyola of Chicago. Interesting first matchup right there, because this is the Tennessee Classic and it's going to be at home. And then Tennessee also has Bowling Green the day after. But the big matchup is going to be Purdue. That Purdue-Tennessee matchup is going to be a barn burner right there. Then Tennessee hits the road to North Carolina State for the North Carolina State tournament as they play Elon. Is it the University of Elon Musk? A bad joke, I'm sorry. But they're playing Elon on September 2nd. Then on September 3rd, Tennessee is playing Colgate, and then they play host NC State following that day. And then Tennessee has the Rocky Top Classic, which is another one of their tournaments, as they play New Hampshire on September 9th, and then they play Norfolk State and the Citadel on September 10th, respectively. Then Tennessee plays Western Kentucky. This is a very good non-conference matchup. It's going to be at home, but playing Western Kentucky is kind of going to be a little test for the Lady Vols. Western Kentucky is a very good program, and I want to say that team made the round of 32. They did make the round of 32, but they didn't really go far after that, just because Conference USA is basically theirs for the taking. But that Western Kentucky matchup is going to be a great matchup right there. I really look forward to seeing Western Kentucky versus Tennessee. And it's kind of a good rivalry. I think Western Kentucky is kind of baby Kentucky, except it's not Kentucky. It's just baby Kentucky. It's Kentucky Junior. I digress. So anyway, jumping back to Tennessee's schedule, they head to Pitt. They head to Pittsburgh on September 16th to take on host Pitt. And then September 17th, they play Ohio State. Now, the Ohio State matchup is a rematch of the round of 32 matchup, which Ohio State won in straight sets. I really think that Ohio State-Tennessee matchup is going to be a great matchup, especially since it's a grudge match. But Ohio State is stacked. Pitt is also going to be another tough matchup for Tennessee. But if they can get one win between those two schools, that'll give Tennessee some momentum going into their SEC opener. Speaking of which, it happens to be at home against Missouri. Now, for those of you that remember, Missouri was the team that beat Tennessee last year, as Missouri lost. They were not good. Let's get that out of the way. But Missouri upset Tennessee in 5 sets, which was shocking to everybody. So, if I were Tennessee, I would not underestimate Missouri in any way, shape, or form. They do not want a repeat of last year's performance. That is on September 21st. Then on September 24th and 25th, Tennessee hits the road to College Station to take on Texas A&M. Following that matchup, Tennessee heads back home to take on Florida on October 5th. That Florida matchup is going to be a very good one. I think it's going to really test Tennessee when it comes to the SEC. And that's their first test so far. Notice the word so far. In that week, Florida is going to get tested quite a bit. And that October 5th matchup is a Wednesday matchup. That's not even their whole schedule that week. Tennessee also hosts South Carolina on October 8th and 9th. Now, South Carolina is well known for beating teams in the SEC that they're not supposed to beat. I really think Tennessee is going to have to be on its toes for South Carolina. But playing at home should give it somewhat of an advantage. I think Tennessee has that potential to beat South Carolina, but they can't underestimate South Carolina. South Carolina is a very good team, and they made the NCAA tournament last year, so there's that right there. Tennessee will also get challenged on October 14th and 15th when it hits the road to take on Arkansas. Now, Arkansas is kind of in the middle of the pack. They're not bad, but they're not great. I think Arkansas could be a sneaky good matchup, just because if I want to say Arkansas beat Tennessee last year. Either way, I think that's going to be a sneaky good matchup, especially since the Razorbacks are obviously underrated. They kind of want to be in that echelon of a very good SEC team. Like, they're kind of good, but they can't break through the really good department. And then following October 14th and 15th, Tennessee plays at Auburn. They should handle Auburn quite well. Then on November 2nd, Tennessee's going to have quite a bit of a break as Tennessee plays at Ole Miss. Ole Miss had a lot of success last year, as Tennessee is going to have to be on its toes. We'll have to see what happens with Ole Miss. They had a great year last year. It wasn't, historic, but overall, I think Tennessee should be able to handle Ole Miss. It's going to be a tricky matchup, though, just because it's at Ole Miss. And then Tennessee heads back home on November 5th and 6th to take on LSU. Going to be a great matchup right there. LSU is sneaky good, but Tennessee should be able to handle the Tigers. And then Tennessee will remain at home against Georgia on November 11th. Now, Georgia is a sneaky good team just because Georgia sometimes pulls off upsets in the SEC. However, Tennessee should be able to handle Georgia. That Georgia game could be a trap game right there, just because their next game will be against Kentucky on the road. And honestly, that is 100% trap game. That Georgia match is a 100% trap game match for Tennessee, as they can't look ahead to Kentucky just because Kentucky is just so darn good. Even shorthanded, Kentucky swept Tennessee last year. It's just so mind-boggling how good Kentucky can be. But they're going to have a totally different identity next year when they don't have any of the Skinner girls. So, we'll see. Then Tennessee has another tough series on November 19th and 20th, in addition to their week against Kentucky, as Tennessee plays Mississippi State at home. So it's another one of those interesting matchups. I think Mississippi State is going to give Tennessee a major challenge. Remember, last year Mississippi State had a successful, very good season. They only lost 2 games going into the NCAA tournament, and overall, they had themselves a historic season. The only thing that was missing was an NCAA tournament win. Either way, I think Mississippi State is going to be a barn burner for Tennessee. And then Tennessee closes out the season at Alabama. I'm sorry to say this, Davidson, if you're still listening, but Tennessee should handle Alabama. I'm not trying to say Alabama is bad, but Tennessee is just very good. The only thing that could surprise me is if Tennessee has a letdown on their last day/week of the regular season, and they can't afford that, especially since Kentucky has been occupying the SEC. But this year could be up for grabs. Like Kentucky, Florida, Tennessee, maybe Mississippi State could be the front runners for the SEC crown. Remember, there is no SEC tournament, so basically it's regular season or you got to apply as an at-large. But I think this Tennessee team is going to be ready for this season. They did get a couple good transfers. They do return some of their players from last season who took their fifth year from COVID. And overall, I think Tennessee is not going to want to be underestimated. I think this Tennessee team has a lot to offer when it comes to not only the SEC, but to the entire NCAA women's volleyball world. As Gina says, Arkansas has an excellent men's basketball team. She did play-by-play for the NCAA tournament, March Madness. Yes, I do remember that, Gina, and she did a fantastic job. So she wanted to put that little tidbit for Arkansas right there. So there's that for all the schedule releases on the NCAA women's volleyball side of things. Let's take ourselves a quick little commercial break. When we come back, we will be discussing some Volleyball Nations League on the women's side, and then we will then be previewing the AVP Muskegon Open, and then I have my little announcement at the end. So you are listening to Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. We'll be right back after this.
From the shores of the Puget Sound to the rushing waters of the Columbia River, stretching across the Great Cascades, and on IE Sports Radio lives the Northwest Territory Sports Show, hosted by me, Brad Buckingham. On this show, I cover all the great collegiate and professional sport teams that we have here in the Pacific Northwest. Of course, I'm talking about the Seattle Seahawks, Seattle Mariners, Sounders, and even the Seattle Kraken. But I can't forget all of that is good in Oregon either. I got the Trailblazers, the Oregon Ducks, the Beavers, even the Timbers, and much, much more. You can listen to the show every Sunday from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern, noon to 1 p.m. Pacific on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
What's up, sports fans? Are you looking for the latest on Northern California sports? Then take a trip out west with me, your host, Gina G, on Reppin' to NorCal Sports, right here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. I'll be bringing it to you all the way live every Monday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. And it's always a packed show. I'll bring you everything Dynastic 49ers, the bite of the San Jose Sharks, torture of the San Francisco Giants, the Golden State Warriors that we still believe. Then take you across the bay to the rise and grind of the Oakland A's. I've got you covered on college ball from the Cal Bears to the Stanford Cardinal, so that no matter what, reppin' in NorCal Sports is always reppin' the Bay. So if you bleed red and gold, or you're looking to keep an eye out west in them thar hills, don't miss me, Gina G, on reppin' in NorCal Sports. Catch me every Monday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, and I'll have your fandom repped harder than a trio of defenders guarding Stephen Curry before his buzzer beater is Gucci.
Back with segment number 2 of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. Definitely do check out those two shows. Northwest Territory Sports with Brad Buckingham goes on every Sunday at 11 a.m. Pacific time. Also check out Reppin' NorCal Sports with Gina G. She actually went on today, as she went on at 3:30 p.m. Pacific time, as she also had a little guest courtesy of her little the IE Sports Radio 8-year anniversary, and basically she did great. She and her guest really did great, and honestly, they killed it today. They talked all things San Francisco 49ers, San Francisco Giants, and then also Golden State Warriors, which are in the NBA Finals. But I digress. But definitely do check out Gina G. She does an outstanding job when it comes to her show, and honestly, I think she continues to do well, and I'm glad Gina G is back on the air. Gina, your support for Set Point does not go unnoticed, so thank you. Gina says thank you, Teran. So thank you very much, Gina. So now let's get on into segment number 2 of Set Point. So unfortunately, for me, I cannot preview the AVP's event of the Muskegon Open, as unfortunately the brackets have not been released yet. So the brackets and pools have not been released yet, or any of that sort. I will say this, that they're only 2 days, Saturday and Sunday. Main draw is day 1, and then main draw is day 2. So basically it's going to be like, it's probably going to be like the last tournament where it's just a 16-team tournament, and it's going to have a loser's bracket, and then the final 4 teams will be playing on Sunday, and then they'll be duking it out for court supremacy on the men's and women's side. But it really does stink because I can't preview this. It makes me sad. No. AVP, why you gotta do this to me? Like, what did I ever do to deserve this? Anyway, let's jump on into Volleyball Nations League before I start becoming a crybaby. So, despite no NCAA men's volleyball or women's volleyball or any NCAA, despite no NCAA volleyball to discuss, despite no NBA to recap, and then despite, well, other than last week's Blaze versus Stunners game, but despite no AVP to recap from last week, we still have the Volleyball Nations League going on. So there is volleyball going on, and there's still high school volleyball going on. Well, probably going on in other states, but I think high school season is pretty much over, as every high school team is now transitioning to club, but I digress. So jumping on over to the Volleyball Nations League, the women just got underway, as the U.S. are gone off to a solid start. As their first matchup against Canada, they swept. They won at 25-14, 25-22, and 25-19. And then, their first matchup was against Dominican Republic. They won 25-21, 25-17, 25-18. That was actually in the last week of May. Then, in June, then they beat Canada 25-14, 25-22, 25-19. Then, following that matchup, they had to play their biggest rival in Brazil. Now, the last time Brazil and the U.S. met, other than the VNL League from this past weekend, was basically the 2021 Olympic Games, where the two met in the gold medal match, and the U.S. dominated and won that match in straight sets, and won their first ever gold medal in its team's history. Anyway, that was basically the same thing what happened in this VNL matchup. USA swept Brazil 25-21, 25-20, and 25-18. This was despite having the strong arm of Julia Bergman. And honestly, the U.S. looked dominant. They were really looking good through their first 3 matches. There's a reason why they were number 1 in the nation for a reason. And Brazil was actually number 2 in the nation, but we all knew who the true number 1 was, right? Except the U.S.'s next match against Japan, which was yesterday, really went awry for the U.S. They lost the first set 25-22, lost the second set 25-20, and then the third set, U.S. lost that set 25-20. So the U.S. got swept by Japan. However, as I alluded to on Twitter, I said before we all hit the panic button on why the U.S. lost, Japan was 3-0 going into this match. And from what I heard, Japan really short-served the heck out of the ball. They really made the U.S. struggle when it came to short serves and whatnot. And honestly, that's kind of what really hurt the U.S.'s offense. And it was really tough for them to run their offense effectively. So that was kind of the reason why the U.S. just did not have the game that they wanted. Overall, it's just one loss, though. I really don't think the U.S. should hit the panic button just yet. I think the U.S. just needs to look back on their mistakes, and they do need to prepare for short serves. Because if they're not prepared for any type of serve, whether it's topspin serve or jump floats or short serves, then they're going to be at the mercy of the other team. Russ Rose one time said this: if you cannot serve and pass, then you will be at the mercy of the opposing team. And that was a great quote from the great Russ Rose, the former Penn State women's volleyball coach. And those words could not have been said any better. So overall, for the U.S. women's volleyball team, it was a tough one. They lost to Japan, but a loss is only tough if it's dwelled on. And I don't think anyone expects them to be perfect, especially with a lot of newcomers. They have quite a bit of newcomers on their team. They no longer have Jordan Larson on their team. They no longer have a majority, well, not like a majority of their players. They have a good chunk of their players like Annie Drews, Michelle Barch-Hackley, and they have some newcomers on their team as well. As once again, they have quite a bit of newcomers, but they have quite a bit of veterans. They have Morgan Hentz, who I think is a newcomer. Tori Dixon, I believe, is a newcomer. Lauren Carlini is a newcomer. Maddie Kingdon Rochelle is a newcomer. Breon Butler, newcomer. Sarah Willett Parsons is a newcomer. Dana Retke, newcomer. Cara Bejima, newcomer. Jenna Gray, newcomer. Kendall White, newcomer. Ali Fronti, newcomer. And Anna Stevenson, newcomer. They're only returning players, and they actually don't have Michelle Barch-Hackley, so that was a mistake on my part. So my bad, everybody. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to the people. I made a mistake. But their only returning players from that gold medal team are Jordan Thompson and Annie Drews. That's it. That's your only returners from that gold medal team. So the fact that the U.S. was able to still beat Brazil, despite having only 2 players return from their gold medal team, is quite interesting. I still think the U.S. is still in good shape. It's just that they're going to have to learn from their mistakes. I basically said, you have to learn from your mistakes. You can't afford to dwell on this loss, because a loss is only tough if it's dwelled on, and there's no use crying over spilt milk. Like, it's not the end of the world, that's for sure. So I think the U.S. is just fine. I think we all just need to just pump the brakes and just basically say, maybe Japan is actually good. Maybe we all need to realize that the U.S. isn't as invincible as we all thought they were, as Japan is the only team that is undefeated. Japan had themselves an interesting start to their season in terms of the VNL, as they swept South Korea, but then they had to go 5 with Germany, and they actually had to reverse sweep Germany. I was very surprised. I'm like, what? So the U.S. lost to a Japan team that had to reverse sweep Germany. But I guess this is the beauty of the VNL. Like, no team is, like, superior. Like, even the Titan-like teams can be vulnerable. Like the U.S. Like, you never know what you can get when it comes to the VNL. And honestly, I like it. I like that it's not, like, heavily dominated by the U.S. and whatnot, or Brazil and whatnot, or Germany, or Japan, or China. I like how there's a lot of parity, and I think that's what makes the VNL special. Going back to Japan's schedule, they won in 4 sets over the Dominican Republic, and then they just recently swept the U.S. Believe it or not, those 3 sets that the U.S. lost are actually the first sets that the U.S. has lost all VNL so far. Now, is it the end of the world? Of course not. The U.S. can definitely bounce back. They're obviously going to have to, I wouldn't say play better, but again, learn from their mistakes. Their next matchup is on Wednesday against Bulgaria. and they play Poland the day after, then China on Saturday, so they get a day rest, then they play China. And then on Sunday, they play Thailand in round 1. I don't know what this round 1 is, but either way, that is how it's supposed to be. So we'll see what happens when it comes to the U.S. Currently, right now, the U.S. they're tied for second with several other teams, but they are currently resting in third place in the standings, right behind China, who has kind of the tiebreaker in terms of sets won, as they have 10 points. Japan is 4-0 and they have 11 points. The U.S. has 9 points, and Turkey has 9 points, and Serbia has 9 points, and Brazil has 9 points. So it's kind of a logjam for that second spot. So a lot will be answered come the next week. So the U.S. plays, well, I already went over the schedule. Bulgaria, Poland, China, and Thailand. I really think that China matchup is going to be quite interesting. I really think that the U.S. could have a little struggle against China, but you never know what could happen entirely when it comes to the entire VNL. Just because the VNL is definitely living up to its parity, and I love it. Not even the Bulgaria matchup is guaranteed, even though Bulgaria is 1-3. The Poland matchup, Poland is 3-1 going into this upcoming week, and then China is 3-1 as well, and then Thailand is 3-1 as well. So the U.S. has a lot to prove, so they can't really look too far ahead. They have to take it one match at a time, and they just got to learn from their mistakes. So we'll see what happens. And I really think those newcomers on the U.S., they've gotten their feet wet. They now know what to expect. Now it's time they run with it. Obviously, they got a taste of what the rivalry with Brazil is like. But overall, I think the U.S. and its newcomers will be just fine. So let's put the panic button away. We're not going to freak out over this one loss. So let's see what happens come next week. So that is that for the Volleyball Nations League right there. And since there is no AVP to go over or preview, that means set point is over, right? No. We still have the special announcement that I have. So for those of you that saw on Thursday, I didn't mean to do this, and I do apologize. Some of you are probably wondering, well, why is set point wondering about the media, the Grant Berger Media Award? So I tweeted, at first I tweeted, how do you get nominated for the Grant Berger Media Award? And I basically quote tweeted and said, I'm really curious as to how you get nominated for the Grant Berger Media Award. I did not know I would get quite a bit of a response, as I got lots of people responding to me. I actually got quite a bit of my friends to respond to me saying nominations are sent out, blah, 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 blah. And then eventually I got an answer from Pat Henderson of the AVCA. And I really got to give a shout out to Pat Henderson. He reached out to me and he said nominations go out next week. Well, when I messaged him, or when I was wondering about the Grant Berger Media Awards on Thursday, he said nominations go out next week, aka Tuesday. And I kind of felt foolish for just wondering how the awards and nomination process was. So I felt a little desperate. I'm sorry. First of all, I want to thank everyone that reached out and informed me of this. And once again, I definitely got to give a shout to Pat Henderson of the AVCA. I wasn't trying to go out and ask for attention or whatnot. I was just wondering how someone gets nominated for a certain media award. Just because I'm kind of curious about it. Just because, how do I know I want to be nominated? I'd like to be nominated for this award. And maybe I want to nominate someone else. So there's that. But now that I'm mentioning the Grant Berger Media Award, took it upon myself, and the reason why I wanted to inquire about the Grant Berger Media Award is because I really want Set Point to at least get nominated or to basically get like an honorable mention for this award. And honestly, why not Set Point? This is kind of my thing, and this is kind of what'll get Set Point noticed. So here are 5 reasons why Set Point, or myself, should be nominated for the Grant Berger Media Award. And nominations can go out tomorrow, and anyone can nominate anybody. Like, it's not just SIDs or coaches, but people can self-nominate themselves. Let's get on into the 5 reasons why Set Point / myself should be nominated for the Grant Berger Media Award. So, reason number 1, Set Point talks about all things volleyball, year-round. There is no days off. NCAA men's volleyball, NCAA beach volleyball, NVA, AVP, VNL, the 3C2A, or the California Community College Athletic Association volleyball, and even high school boys and girls volleyball. Set Point talks about all things volleyball. And I will not be taking any days off. I don't take days off. I don't think there's such thing as an off season for me. So I talk all things volleyball. I'm not trying to say talking about just women's volleyball isn't good, but I will talk all things volleyball. That is one of the reasons why I'm so creative, and that is one of the reasons why I feel Set Point should be nominated for the Grant Berger Media Award. Reason number 2, Set Point hasn't missed a week in 818 days. That's 2 years, 2 months, and 27 days in counting. In addition, Set Point has been going on for 119 straight episodes, if my math serves me correct. Either way, Set Point hasn't missed a week since March 3rd, 2020. And I don't plan on missing a week anytime soon. So, in other words, Set Point is really good at being consistent. Even when NCAA women's volleyball season goes, NCAA men's volleyball comes, as well as NCAA beach volleyball, and then the NVA. And then when that goes, it's the AVP, then the VNL. And then when that goes, NCAA women's volleyball starts up again, and then the cycle begins over and over again. Set Point is a 365-day process. Reason number 3, Set Point has had 29 different guests in the past, and some of the noteworthy guests include Alan Knipe, the Long Beach State men's volleyball coach, McKay Smith, the Long Beach State assistant men's volleyball coach, Kevin Birch, the Ohio State men's volleyball coach, Travis Turner, the Orange Coast College men's volleyball coach, and the all-time winningest coach at Orange Coast College, and Emily Eman, former Northwestern volleyball player and Big Ten analyst and host. The list can go on and on when it comes to my past guests, but I think this would turn into probably a 2-hour episode, which we don't want. Either way, I'm willing to go above and beyond to try to get guests whenever I can. I know I've been living a whirlwind life, but I can definitely make time to get guests on my show. Whether it's Alan Knipe or anyone else, I definitely will get guests. Whether they're with media, whether they're a coach, whether they're a player, whether they're a former coach or player. Either way, I'm willing to get anyone on Set Point that wants to talk volleyball. And I'm totally down to have anybody and anyone. And everyone. Reason number 4. And this is kind of an iffy one. And just so we're clear, this is not for attention. This is kind of just for fun. And this is kind of just for purposes of why Set Point should be nominated for the Grant Berger Media Award. So, reason number 4. Set Point doesn't have any NIL deals, sponsorships, or partnerships outside of being platformed by IE Sports Radio. Despite this, Set Point is not going to make any excuses. It's not going to wallow on the ground and cry and wonder, why don't I have this? Wah. No, Set Point is going to continue to press forward. Even though Set Point isn't as well known as some of these other media outlets, or I'm not as well known as some of these other volleyball media personalities, but I'm just saying I'm going to continue to press forward. I'm going to try to spread the word more about Set Point. And honestly, why not me? I really think Set Point, I've come so far. I've had so much progress with Set Point. I've been on the air for 145 episodes, and why not Set Point? I really want to keep Set Point going. This is kind of my baby, and honestly, I'm not going to abandon it anytime soon. And then this is reason number 5. And then the final reason. So, reason number 5 of why Set Point / myself should be nominated for the Grant Berger Media Award is, despite no volleyball to recap on various weeks, Set Point is still willing to be creative and still go on the air. Much like this week's episode, where there was no NCAA volleyball or NVA action or AVP action to recap, Set Point will still find a way to go on the air. Another example of me finding creative ways to go on the air despite no volleyball would be the COVID-19 times back in 2020. After everything volleyball was canceled, I could have made the easy decision to just take a hiatus until volleyball came back, whenever that may be. But instead of taking the easy way out and taking the hiatus, I decided to get creative and keep Set Point going. Whether it was having certain themes to my show on certain episodes, or whether it was having certain guests on certain episodes, Set Point still found a way to stay and will still find a way to remain on the air. For Set Point, like I said, there's no such thing as an off season. Set Point will be going year-round, 365 days around the sun, and nothing, I repeat, nothing is going to do anything to try to derail me. Not even sickness. Even though my quality would be kind of bad, but I digress on that. So, those are my top 5 reasons for why Set Point should be nominated and maybe win the Grant Berger Media Award. Again, this is kind of just like a shameless plug. If you want to nominate me, I truly appreciate it. I plan to nominate myself and to put my best foot forward. If you all want to nominate me, first and foremost, I thank you for nominating me. Second of all, if you're continuing to support the show, regardless of who you are, whether you're listening live on Spreaker, whether you're listening live on any other platform, I really do appreciate you. If you've listened in the past, I appreciate you. If for some reason I do win or become like a Grant Berger Media Award finalist, like say second team or third team, I will do everything I can to improve Set Point, even if it means having myself in picture-in-picture, or having more guests on, or just willing to improve the quality of my show. If, for some reason, I do get nominated for the Grant Berger Media Award, or I'm like a finalist or whatnot, I promise you, Set Point will continue to improve every single step of the way until it is one of the top volleyball shows on the planet, or in the universe, and all of the above. Either way, I do appreciate everyone's support. I do appreciate everyone's time. I thank you all for listening to this message. And this is Teran Rodriguez, and I approve of this message. And that's going to do it for this week's episode of Set Point. Without any further delay, let us drop the beat, because I'm about to dip like a banana in chocolate. You feel me? Thank you everyone for tuning in to Set Point. I really do appreciate you all tuning in. If you listen live, I appreciate you. If you listen on the playback, I appreciate you. If you listen at work, I appreciate you. If you listen in the wee hours in the morning, I appreciate you. If you listen at any time, any place, anywhere, I really do appreciate you. Big shout to the chat room that listen in. Gina G, David DeCrooks, Mike Pat, and Pierre Moss. I really do appreciate you all tuning in on the Spreaker chat room. I really do appreciate everyone that listens whenever they can. It really means the world to me, and you're the reason why I keep going. For everyone here at IE Sports Radio, this is Teran Rodriguez signing off. You all have yourselves a great rest of the week. Be kind to